is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
An unorthodox response to COVID-19. No quarantines, no lockdowns.
I trusted them. I thought they knew what they were doing.
With citizens deciding how to navigate this new reality for themselves.
I haven't been able to hug them, just one little one, because he had been in the quarantine for 14 days together with his parents.
In hopes of a faster recovery.
The strongest case for the Swedish strategy is that it is sustainable in some sense. Locking down an economy is not going to be good.
But not completely shielded from the pandemic's impacts.
I'm afraid my parents are going to be sick. Okay, yeah, I understand that. It's okay to be scared.
A strategy that comes with high uncertainty.
If you have the virus, and you have a lot of the virus, and you're speaking and yelling and moving around as a child, you could very well spread the disease.
At high costs.
Vi sa ju liksom, eller hela Sverige sa, eller Löfven och company sa ju att vi måste skydda våra äldre. Men det vi har gjort, det har ju varit rena massmordet. Massmord på våra äldre.
Resilience, 24 hours in Sweden. Next on Big Story.
At first glance, you could almost get the impression COVID-19 skipped Sweden. On the streets, life looks normal. But the virus struck hard here.
It's my father, whose name was Jan. He lived at an elderly home outside Stockholm. He lived there because of dementia. And this elderly home caught the virus quite early. And the 2nd of April, we learned that somebody at the ward had the virus. My father lived in the left one, which is called the A, and the B. He lived in the A side, and that side was the one that was hit really hard. On the first floor, the one without the balcony or the terrace there. And he moved in September last year. He was only there for 6 months.
When COVID-19 was first detected at this elderly home outside Stockholm, Helen Gluckman wasn't overly worried. But the speed and ferocity of the virus was not yet clear, at least not to her. Then her dad's symptoms began.
He complained of stomachache and a sore throat, so I called them and asked them if they should test him, but they said no, there is no need for that.
But Glukman's father developed a high fever. Finally, staff at the home agreed to test him for COVID-19. It came back positive.
And then the doctor ordered palliative care, which is morphine, without seeing my father. They didn't do a medical examination because the doctor never went out to the elderly home. They just ordered that. And everybody knows now that morphine will kill you eventually because it will take your breathing away. If I had known that by then, I would have said, don't give it to him. But I trusted. They called me and said, we think your father needs this kind of care. And I trusted them. I thought they knew what they were doing.
Ja, jag var sjuk i 5 veckor, alltså liggandes. Och jag gick ner 10 kilo, 12 kilo. Alltså jag var bara rasade i vikt, jag kunde inte äta. Jag kräktes, hade diarré jättelänge. Och jag har fortfarande problem med det.
Joanna Dunda. In this nation of 10 million, she's one of roughly 85,000 Swedes who've caught COVID-19. Like Glukman's father Jan, she caught it early in the epidemic. She's back on her feet, but she's still in COVID's grip.
Jag tappar jättemycket hår. Jag har fått klippa av mig håret för att jag har tappat så mycket hår. Jag har fortfarande dålig mage, mår lätt illa och sen är jag jättetrött, alltså jättetrött.
The 39-year-old is so tired she's had to give up her passion, sports and working out. In fact, she really can't exert herself at all.
Alltså om jag sitter så här, nu har jag suttit ett tag, så då är min puls på 95. Mycket högre än vanligt. Jag är ganska tränad annars så att min vilopuls är ganska bra. Eller alltså på 60, 65, alltså max. Om jag skulle ställa mig upp nu, då skulle den gå upp ännu mer. Så att den är mycket högre än vanligt.
Just climbing stairs can send Dundar's pulse to as high as 160, dangerously close to heart attack levels.
Alltså jag kan bli rädd när jag får trippelslag, alltså vad heter det? Alltså när hjärtat rusar, vilket det gör några gånger om dagen. Då kan jag bli lite rädd, alltså att jag blir ganska rädd, men jag försöker verkligen hålla mig lugn i allt det här och bara okej, det kommer vara över, det kommer bli bättre. Ja, nu har jag suttit ner och nu ska jag kolla min puls. Jag mätte min lungkapacitet. Den visade att min lungålder är 73 år. Så den är ganska dålig.
To prove her point, Dunda walks her bike for about a minute, then checks her pulse again. 107. She's already out of breath. Dunda thinks she picked up COVID-19 at her job as a nurse's assistant in a Stockholm hospital. Sweden, like many countries, was caught off guard when the pandemic struck. Hospitals lacked protective gear, from masks to trained personnel to ventilators. Which is in part why Helen Glukman's father got morphine instead of oxygen. Of Sweden's nearly 6,000 COVID-19 victims, nearly half have been in nursing homes.
Vi sa ju liksom, eller hela Sverige sa, eller Löfven och company sa ju att vi måste skydda våra äldre. Men det vi har gjort, det har ju varit rena massmordet. Massmord på våra äldre.
Murder by willful negligence, says this nurse from a Swedish elderly home. She wants her identity concealed. She's afraid, she says, of losing her job for exposing the neglect.
För det var ingen som förstod hur allvarligt det här var. Folk gick ju in till den här boenden som hade det här viruset, fick det själva, vart jättedåliga och sen så spred det sig som en löpeld.
Making things worse, many unwitting caregivers rotated through several nursing homes a day, spreading the virus further. As cases mounted, the nurse says, the system didn't respond. She says they didn't even have morphine for their COVID patients, just water.
Ja, men trösta och vara där. Det har ju liksom varit det vi har försökt och gjort. Ja, jag kommer ihåg när jag pratade med en person och när hon fick reda på att hon var positiv så hon ringde ju till sina barn naturligtvis. Men sen så gick det 3 dagar så var hon död.
Critics say elderly residents were abandoned at the height of the COVID crisis. Swedish policy forbid most doctors from visiting the homes. Hospitals refused to take in the infected elderly.
We should be aware that many of these people have a life expectancy of multiple years. If you've turned 80, your life expectancy is not 1 month or 3 months, it's actually multiple years. Just thinking the concept that it doesn't matter or implying the concept that is not such a big deal because it's elderly people makes me cringe, to be honest with you.
Jan Lutfall is a scientist and expert in nanobiology, one of 22 researchers and doctors who wrote an open letter to the government in April, urging it to be more proactive as the crisis unfolded to protect the most vulnerable. The government denies it turned its back on the elderly, but it admits it erred with the nursing homes.
The things we can point to, I mean, is once again the long-term care facilities. I think if we had, as a society, looked more at them, and we have looked at them during the years already, but to really force some kind of improvement in some of them, I mean, many of them works very well. That could have made a difference. Maybe earlier testing could have made some kind of difference, especially among the elderly homes.
Testing identifies those infected, which helps contain the virus's spread. But what the world holds out for is a vaccine. One Swedish pharmaceutical company has been out front in the search. It's partnered with researchers at Oxford University, carrying out large-scale trials on volunteers in Europe, the US, and South America.
One of the earliest and most promising COVID-19 vaccine trials is now on hold.
Then a vaccinated volunteer fell ill. The trial was paused for several days. The delay was most likely a minor blip in the process. Trials derail all the time. But this scare was a reminder of the dangers of counting on a quick cure. Or any cure at all. There's no guarantee they'll ever find a vaccine for this coronavirus. Viruses are clever, especially given that they're not even considered living beings. Why not?
Viruses cannot replicate, they cannot divide by themselves. They need to hijack certain components inside our cells. So virus get into our body, we may inhale it, for example. Then the virus seeks certain cells which they can penetrate.
Eventually it resides sufficiently long at the surface to anchor itself. And once it anchors, it is interested in getting access. It is sort of a bang on the door to your cells in the lung, to ask your cells to duplicate the virus molecule. They have different tricks to let you know that they are not dangerous, that it's okay to help them to duplicate.
And then the virus is hijacking the machinery inside of the cell to make its proteins, make its components, right? And then the cell helps make those molecules, and then they reassemble automatically or somehow to become a new virus.
And then it starts to multiplicate inside the cell of the body. Once the cell is full with viral particles, it bursts, and all viral particles goes out in the body. All of them seeks new cells to infect, and it will go on and go on and go on like that. So that's how an infection spreads in our body.
As infections spread, the body's immune system kicks in, producing weapons of self-defense, namely antibodies. With COVID-19, one big question is whether people can develop enough antibodies to achieve lasting immunity, and whether enough immune people can lead societies to collective or so-called herd immunity, where enough of the population becomes immune to the virus, either through vaccination or surviving an infection, thus blocking the disease's spread. But researchers are still trying to figure out just how many people in the population have to have immunity to make that happen.
Building up immunity is never a strategy, but it is a consequence. And it very much turned out to be a consequence here.
Infectious disease specialist Hans Gustav Ljunggren and his team of 60 scientists believe herd immunity is closer than most think, not because of antibodies. Those are still too low within the population. He's focused on another of the body's weapons, T lymphocytes, or T cells. T cells and antibodies work together, a sort of dynamic duo, fighting infection side by side.
Basically, antibodies are soluble proteins. They target single virus particles in the body and neutralize them. T cells, they target the cells that produce millions of viral particles. So there's one system that goes for the free missiles, the viruses. There's one system that goes for the factory that produces these virus particles.
Ljunggren conducted small studies on COVID and T cells in Sweden this summer. About 30% of people tested had them to varying degrees. Surprisingly, he says, only half of the same subjects had antibodies. He hopes the higher T cell count means people could be inching towards immunity.
As I said, frequencies of individuals with antibodies were disappointingly low towards the beginning of the summer in Sweden. In Stockholm, where we have had the highest infections rates in our country, it was around 15%, 17% in that range. We found that up to 30% of the individuals in small groups assessed had T cells, meaning that many more than those that had developed antibodies had developed at least a degree of an immune response that could possibly protect or at least make it more difficult for the virus to infect and cause disease in those individuals. So that was very rewarding. The fact that you mount efficient T cell responses to this virus is certainly good news because it is one of the key protectors from virus infections. And the whole function of T cells is to protect our bodies primarily from viral infections.
Ljunggren cautions it could be many months before scientists can measure reliable immunity levels, much less know whether herd immunity is even possible. In the meantime, the government has made moves to better protect its Achilles heel, its nursing homes, from further infections.
So we have a lot more testing in the elderly homes. We have a lot more stricter follow-up for the people working in elderly homes to make sure that they know about the rules, they know about the hygienic measurements, and they know what to do if they have symptoms.
Sweden's nursing home problems aside, the country's COVID-19 strategy enjoys large support among Swedes. It's a strategy that's radically different, more relaxed than the rest of the world's. While there are a few rules, no gatherings of over 50 people, only sit-down service in bars, what's drawn global attention is what Sweden hasn't done. There's been no lockdown here. Schools have not closed. As for masks, you could wear one, but the government doesn't see the point.
I enjoy this and I think this is the evidence of a cozy approach to the pandemics by the younger people.
Professor Emeritus of Ecology, GORAN BENGTSSON, strolls through this university town, pleased with what he sees. BENGTSSON is one of the architects of Sweden's soft-touch COVID plan.
Of course, if you are from United States or you are from Spain, you would be upset to see people sitting, talking to each other so close without the mask. Yes, and I would say, give me the evidence that they are infected each other. Yes, where is the evidence? I don't think they, as long as none of them is infected, they cannot transmit. So I would like to see the evidence that this is disastrous. In my opinion, it's just great that people can live more or less normal for an hour or two. In this situation, it's outdoors, and they have to spit on each other to transmit.
Social distancing is far more effective than lockdowns or masks, BENGTSSON says. Masks, he says, can get contaminated and create a false sense of security. But the best strategy of all?
I would suggest keep your mouth shut. If you don't talk to somebody, for instance, out in city, then you don't spread the virus. It's when you talk through a mask or with a distance that you spread it. But I have no understanding of people wearing face masks on the street with a distance of 2 meters to the next person. My goodness, I say. Are you protecting them? But there's no possibility whatsoever to infect your neighbors if they are that far from you.
Sweden asks people to voluntarily respect social distancing. In most of the world, it's been enforced via lockdowns. Sweden calls that approach dangerous, at least in the long run.
The virus is still around in the society, and when you release these lockdown people, they are all susceptible, regardless of what kind of virus it is. And when they are relieved in society, they easily pick up the virus.
Because they go back to their old habits?
Yeah, they do, yes.
BENGTSSON points to the rest of Europe, which locked down and now struggles with second waves of COVID-19. Daily infection rates in Sweden, by contrast, are at record lows. Stockholm researcher and economist Charlotta Stern says to get people to change the habits that help spread the virus, persuasion works better than punishment.
I mean, it comes back to a culture of trust, I think, and we see from measures of the world when we compare different countries that Sweden end up being quite highly ranked when it comes to social trust. We trust our government, but we also have a government that trusts us.
Mutual trust, coupled with a sense of personal responsibility, that seems to be the key to Sweden's ability to control COVID-19.
Sometimes it is understood as being egocentric, that individualism is something that means that I only care for myself. And I don't think that's true in Sweden. I think that the individualism we see, the reliance on individuals for taking responsibility, is actually coupled with the notion that you also are responsible for other people. And so implicit in taking care of yourself is also caring for others.
For some Swedes, caring for others has meant taking social distancing to the extreme.
Most people, at least people I've been talking to and people I know, they take their own responsibility because they don't want this disease, especially in our age.
Retirees Malu and Lars Eliasson ride out the coronavirus in a remote cabin, hours from their home in the city of Malmö in Sweden's south. Normally, this is their summer place, but the government suggested no one travel more than 2 hours from their primary residence to reduce the virus's spread. So for the first half of summer, the Eliassons resisted the temptation to escape the city.
No one would have stopped us, but they recommended us not to do that because
if I should get fever up here or something, I will be a burden to the hospitals up here. And they had plenty enough with their own people who lives here permanently. So therefore we felt that we should stay at home until they say that now you can go longer distances.
And they did in July. The Eliassons' plan now is to stay as long as they can, possibly into winter. Here, isolated, they feel safe and free.
I haven't been to the hairdresser since January. I used to have shorter hair. I haven't been there. I called her and asked if she could cut my hair outdoors, but she couldn't do that. So I thought, what? I'm up in the island here now. I don't care. It will grow. So we'll see when I will cut my hair. I have to make my, what do you call it, braids. Pippi Longstocking hairdo.
Yes, the fall is coming, so still it's rather warm in the water. But, you know, if you're a little bit frozen, you put on the sauna here, so I will show you. We have a lot of friends here on the island. They also like to be together with us in the sauna. But because of the COVID, the corona, we can't do it this season. So they are welcome, but then they have to do it by themselves. Ah, smells good. It's more safer here on the island, and it's really nice to be here. We can swim in the lake, and today it started to rain because it has been so dry here before, and now we can start to pick a lot of mushrooms. We are not so afraid because we try to keep distance to other people, and I hope that's correct. So far, the advices from the public health authority has been good. So maybe it's typical for the Swedes that we follow the advice from the authorities if we agree with them, of course. Otherwise, we don't follow them. But normally, the advice are good. I'm fixing roof, and now we are rebuilding the kitchen here. So in some way, I feel very comfortable with this because it gives me time to do a lot of things that I didn't have time for before.
The Eliasson summer home normally bustles with family. This year, only the occasional visit from kids and grandkids.
They have been here, but I haven't been able to hug them. Just one little one, because he had been in the quarantine for 14 days together with his parents. So him I could hug. But when the other one came, we had to stay away from here. So that is very, very sad. But that's the way it is this year. So we just stay with it.
Sticking it out as the air turns cooler and the summer steam train makes its final run. The Eliassons are not entirely alone. Just down the wooded path, Ulf Garvald telecommutes to his job as a logistics engineer.
This is my vacation home, and I've been here since I was a kid, so every summer since I was very little. I have had full-time work, but now after the holiday, I have been asked to work only 4 days a week. So it's slightly less, but plus it's nice weather until now.
Business is slowing down, but the government subsidizes his salary. Had there been a lockdown, Garvald says, the Swedish economy would have tanked and taken his company with it.
I think that is actually the strongest case for the Swedish strategy, is that it is sustainable in some sense. I mean, it's sustainable in the sense that locking down an economy is not going to be good I mean, it might help short term with the pandemic. It might be necessary in some societies that was struck really hard, like Italy. But over time, you need an economy, and the cost of shutting down an economy in terms of psychological well-being, unemployment, just stagnation.
But if Sweden's goal was to avoid economic disaster, it's only been partially successful. Sweden's economy shrank by about 8% in the spring quarter. It weathered the storm better than Spain or Italy or even Germany, but fared worse than other Nordic countries. No country is an island. Sweden depends largely on exports, and though it didn't lock down, it has been locked out. Its next-door neighbors, Denmark and Norway, with 5 times fewer deaths, have closed their borders to Swedes. And on top of that, Norway told its citizens, going to Sweden, once back, you self-isolate for 14 days.
Situasjonen her meget alvorlig. I enkelte av grensekommunene, som Strømstad, så det nesten stille og dødt.
The Norwegians stopped coming, virtually all of them. This mega mall in the border village of STRÖMSTAD once teemed with Norwegians taking advantage of Sweden's lower prices on everything from liquor to meat. The mall has lost 99% of its business. In downtown Strömstad, Mayor Kent Hansson laments the border closing. He tried to get Norway to exempt his region from the quarantine rule.
We have very low infection here in this area. The most Norwegians who pass the borderline is being here in this area. About 80-90% are staying here to buy certain things. So they don't go further in Sweden. So that was our hope, that the Norwegian government could see that, but that didn't work out.
With the border effectively closed, Strömstad's harbor remained empty all summer.
If this had been an ordinary day of July, beginning of August, you couldn't see the water because of all the boats. But this year, just a few boats every week. It has been so strange. It's summer temperatures, but there's not summer life as we are used to.
The border closing isn't just keeping shoppers from merchants, it's also separating families, like Nyström's. She's Norwegian, her husband Swedish. But they found a way to stick it to the politicians and the virus.
Hello, god morgon. Jo, tack. My husband proposed to me early this year, and of course we didn't set a date then. We wanted to do it in the summer sometime, maybe after the season. And then the 13th of March came, and we thought, well. But we didn't want to postpone it for a year as the young people do. Of course, we wanted our closest to participate.
But Nyström's closest relatives were stuck on the other side of the border.
It started as a joke. Maybe we should get married at the border. And so my mother could come down and be a witness and stand on the Norwegian side of the border. And the joke sort of, well, stuck. So, well, let's do it. Our wedding took place in the old Svinesund Bridge, a beautiful bridge over the fjord. That is the border between Norway and Sweden. We were on the middle of the bridge, and there is a big white line and says Norway on the north side with big letters, and Sweden, Sverige, on the Swedish side. So we were married just on that line, with my mother on the Norwegian side and the Swedish witness on the Swedish side. And then my mother didn't have to go in quarantine when she went back home.
The wedding was supposed to be low-key, but reporters got tipped off.
And then it just exploded. It was a lot of people calling us from radio, television, other newspapers, from the big French news agency. So it was a wonderful day.
A joyous, if brief, boost of morale to help make up for Strömstad's empty streets. Store owners like Nyström say they've lost up to 75% of business since the pandemic started. The day the curtain closed on Strömstad is burned into everyone's memory.
It was a Thursday, the 12th of March. It was a lot of people in town. We had a lot of customers. And then the news came on in the evening, and on Friday, the 13th of March, they closed the border, and it was empty. There wasn't people there was almost no one outside, and absolutely no one inside.
There was hope that Swedish tourists or other visitors might pick up the slack, but it hasn't been enough.
Yesterday we had 6 paying customers. On a busy day in July, maybe we have about 1,000 people inside, and more than 100 customers, well, buying things. So, but this year, we would be happy if we had 30 buying something. And this year we had to say stop to someone because we didn't want to have more than 15 people inside at the same time. We couldn't imagine that it was going to last for weeks, for months, and maybe even longer. Now we're in September, and we can't see any possibilities for opening yet. So I think this year will go to history as a very special year, not only for us, because for the whole world, but it still feels strange. It's almost like we are not at home. Because it's a different town, it's a different way of life, everything's different.
As winter approaches, there is some good news here. The rate of new daily COVID cases in Sweden continues to drop steadily. From the outset, Sweden has been criticized in foreign media for its light touch. Swedish authorities say they've been playing the long game, and it's paying off.
There has been a very mixed picture that has been given, and in some ways there has been quite a few misunderstandings. The measurements that were taken in Sweden were very thorough. We're saying that you shall keep distance from other individuals, you shall stay at home if you have any type of symptoms. Quite early on we realized that this pandemic we need to have measurements that can be long-lasting, have an understanding in the population and a trust on what measurements that were taken, and on the other hand also to look at a whole societal approach to make sure that the measurements that were taken did not have a strong backside.
In other words, it's best to avoid any fixes that could be worse than the problem itself.
So, for instance, the decision to keep the schools open for children up until age 15 to 16 was based on the fact that we know that if schooling is closed for a long period, you can have large effect later in life for many children. And we also saw early on from the figures from China that children were not as heavily affected as the adults. Even though we knew that the children could be diseased, we had no facts showing that children were a driver of disease.
But is a lack of evidence proof enough, especially when dealing with a new deadly disease? Scientist Jan Lurtwald says with kids, Sweden should be erring on the side of caution.
I think the science is still not 100% sure about how children spread the disease. We know there is spread in schools among children, and we also know that children under the age of 10 actually have more virus in their airways with the infection than older individuals do. whether they transmit those viruses as efficiently as younger or older children like 10 to 20 do or adults do, that's not clear yet. But they can absolutely carry a lot of virus, and there's no real reason why they couldn't spread the disease as well. If you have the virus, you have a lot of the virus, and you're speaking and yelling and moving around as a child, you could very well spread the disease.
Despite that possibility, most parents and teachers are glad schools are open again this fall.
Even though we don't live in families that has lots of difficulties, from the beginning, the pandemic has put a lot of stress on us.
Closing schools and keeping students home, says Stockholm resident Cecilia Ramning, would have only made things worse. She has 4 kids of her own.
I think it affects children in particular, and all our people in general, with lockdowns. So that's why keeping schools and preschools open are so important, so that most of us can go to work. And some of us do have really important jobs in hospitals, schools, authorities. So that's also why it's important to have preschools and schools open, so that the children have a good learning place to be. Of course, lockdowns look different in different countries, but in total lockdowns, I think it affects families in not only positive ways. I think it causes stress for both children and parents, being so close together all the time, and increases conflicts, daily conflicts.
Ramning would know as well as anyone. She's a preschool teacher and principal. Here at the 4 Elements Animal Claw Preschool in Stockholm, teachers try to carry on as usual, but strict new measures are in place. Parents have limited access to school grounds.
One, two.
Kids are taught to wash their hands even more than usual.
5.
We try to talk about Corona and the virus, so we say to the children, now we need to wash our hands all the time, and very thoroughly. We count to 10 and to 20 with all the children, because it's Corona times now, and the children reminds us sometimes, oh no, Cecilia, you need to give me more food, because I can't take the potatoes myself, because it's Corona times. Ah, you're right. Some children have been afraid of, or in other ways showed us that they're scared of the virus. But we try to calm them, we talk about the virus. What are you afraid of? I'm afraid my parents are going to be sick. Okay, yeah, I understand that. It's okay to be scared. That's why we wash our hands all the time. That's why everybody needs to stay at home with the slightest symptoms, and we cooperate everybody so that maybe your parents will not be sick.
Not only did Sweden not close schools, it won't close them even if infections appear. If a teacher or student tests positive for COVID-19, that person must quarantine, but that's it. For everyone else, it's class as usual.
Of course, there might be a risk, but I think that everybody now is very cautious. I know that very many of our families at preschools and most of our friends, they don't see their elder people as much as before. So everyone is taking their personal responsibility very seriously. At our preschools, we don't see
the grandparents anymore since coronavirus started. So I think that everybody takes this personal responsibility very seriously and don't see their elderly as much as before. This house over there is where my parents live and where I grew up. So close, but yet so far. Now, it's difficult to cope with this social distance, I think. I really miss hugging my parents. But of course I don't right now. But it's difficult. I think most people just wave their hands, and some do this elbow greeting. And me and some friends in my family, we do this. So we show that we hug, but we don't hug each other. We hug ourselves. Eller hur? Kramas vi här. Kram.
Adults and young kids banding together to stay healthy, sort of like the T cells and antibodies. The weak link in Sweden's defenses, as in many countries, could be among teens and people in their 20s, the partygoers putting social before distancing, both in cities and deep in the woods.
The scene is pretty happening in Sweden, especially in Stockholm. People love going out in the forest dancing. It's just like what people love to do. We are in the forest, just outside Stockholm, festival every year, and they invited me to come here and play some records and music between the bands and bring some party to the place. This is my first time actually. They make at least one party a year, and nobody really knows when it's going to be.
This is what DJ Daniel Bertholdsson lives for. The beats, the night, the crowds. He hasn't spun since March.
But I'm starting to happening things again, so there's different parties, and people try to be as careful as possible and keep their distance and not drinking from the same bottles and stuff.
The Forest Fest rages till sunrise. The later it gets, the less careful people become. Bertholdsson recognizes the virus could spread at bashes like these, but he says so far it hasn't. Besides, COVID-19 wrecked his life once. Stopping the music again, he says, would be unbearable. Bertholdsson used to gig internationally and work at this record shop, living in a plush apartment nearby.
It was just across the street from here, so it was very comfortable. Like, I could wake up in the morning and put some clothes on, be here 10 minutes, and just open the store and put on a coffee. So that was fantastic, actually.
Vinyl was his life.
The smells and the sounds and the grit and everything about vinyl, I love it.
Then COVID-19 hit Stockholm like a storm. Overnight, the record shop closed. As for the dozens of DJ gigs Bertholdsson had lined up around Europe, all canceled. Bertholdsson canceled his own lease, beelined it for an island 4 hours off the coast.
I basically packed all my stuff up in a couple of hours, and I was lucky enough to have a friend who had a big car, so he just drove past. He was going by the ferry already, so I just put all this stuff on the street and just threw it in a car and sent it down to Gotland. It's the coast of my home island, Gotland, where my heart truly is. I've been away for a while, but I just love coming back here because it grounds you in certain ways. Of course, it's a change of pace where there's maybe not much happening in Gotland if you compare it to Stockholm, but it's super nice at the same time. So it felt kind of nice and comfy and secure to be back on the island during the zombie apocalypse.
spend your whole like teenage years wondering what it would be to be off this island, and now you're just supposed to go back. It's ironic, isn't it?
Bertholdsson is back home, a prodigal son forced to return. But he's not the same young man who left for the capital. His music is different now too. COVID-19 altered his world.
The environment and the mood definitely have a big impact on the music, what you're making. So I think I tend to go a bit darker and a bit more ambient, not as maybe dancey, beat-driven kind of music that I usually do. So it's been more like introvert and more for myself, maybe as like a therapy to myself to make it through it all.
Bertholddsson's plan is to hunker down, spend zero money, and eventually release a new EP for the COVID era. For Helen Gluckman, the goal is keeping her father's memory alive, along with the story of how he and so many others died.
When he moved into the elderly home, he wrote a love letter for my mother. It was amazing, because by then he was, he had dementia, but he wrote that love letter to her, which was very nice. It was his love of his life, and that he hoped that they could kind of remarry, and I don't remember word by word, but it was about that he had loved her forever. I will never get my father back, but I don't want this to happen again. I don't want a doctor to give, some kind of medical treatment over the phone without seeing a patient again. It's so wrong. So now I'm taking the next step to sending in a complaint to the Inspection for Health in Sweden, and they will then go through my father's journal and see if the doctor has done something wrong.
As Gluckman lobbies the system from the outside, nurse's assistant Joanna Dunda is working for change from within.
Ja, jag jobbade igår.
Vad var det då?
Jo, men det var bra. Det gick bra. Det var lugnt. Liksom.
Hur funkar det med lungorna?
Ja, alltså som det var lugnt så funkar det. Men jag har ju valt bort jobb som där det inte går. Eller när man behöver gå mer, vad man ska säga.
Dundar studies to become a registered nurse, in part to help others, like herself, struggling with long-term side effects from COVID-19, so that they're taken seriously. 6 months on, her lungs have still not healed. Every day is an uphill struggle. If Dunda doesn't get better soon, she knows her studying will be for naught. Any nursing job would be too strenuous, but she pushes on. In the face of uncertainty, perseverance. That seems to be also part of the Swedish approach to the coronavirus, along with looking after oneself for the benefit of everyone. Malou and Lars Eliasson think they've found the balance on their tiny island. This night, it's dinner at their cousin's place, just down the shoreline.
Separate the tables, and then we can put it
but
together.
But you're sitting in the corner over there, and it's about 2 meters.
Yes, now I see. I didn't see it.
They'll have companionship.
As you can see, now we are at a dinner party, family, but not that close because they are working. Oscar is going to school, so we won't be very close to them. So therefore, they have set the table. So we are sitting here, and they are sitting there. We can still communicate, we can have a good time, but we are not close to each other.
By social distancing, they try to keep themselves and their family safe until the virus numbers are down enough and their government suggests it's okay for all of them to hug again.
Might be shut on the outside window over there. Get back in.